Shane Ford was 34 years old and spent most of his days crawling through freezing basements, fixing broken HVAC systems around Cleveland. His family believed he was the disappointment Walter Ford never admitted out loud. Shane drove a rusted 2003 pickup, wore the same steel toe boots for 6 winters, and still lived in a small apartment above an auto repair shop in Parma. What they didn't know was that Walter Ford had rewritten part of his estate plan 8 years earlier. And when the lawyer placed the old Omega watch into Shane's hand, Martin Keller slowly closed the folder, looked at the rest of the family, and said, "Everyone else needs to leave the room. Right now." If you're watching from somewhere outside the U.S., drop your country and local time in the comments. And if you enjoy slow burn stories about family betrayal, hidden truth, and quiet revenge, subscribe now. Tomorrow's story gets even colder. Rain slid down the tall windows of Keller and Associates in long gray lines, blurring the Cleveland skyline into streaks of steel and smoke. The conference room smelled like polished walnut old paper and burnt coffee that had been sitting on the warmer too long. Shane Ford stood near the doorway for a moment before taking his seat. Nobody greeted him. Evelyn Ford sat at the far end of the table in a fitted black coat that probably cost more than Shane's pickup truck. Her hands rested calmly beside a leather handbag from Saks Fifth Avenue. Diamond earrings caught the cold light every time she moved her head. Across from her, Grant Ford leaned back in his chair, scrolling through his phone. Navy suit, silver Rolex, fresh haircut, the kind of man who checked stock prices during funerals. Rachel Ford sat beside him with a legal pad open in front of her already, looking bored. She worked corporate litigation at a downtown firm and carried herself like someone who corrected people for using the wrong fork. Shane looked down at his own clothes, dark work jacket, faded jeans, a grease stain near his left sleeve from replacing a compressor unit that morning in Lakewood. He had come straight from work because dead men didn't wait for cleaner clothes. Martin Keller cleared his throat. The old attorney had represented Walter Ford for nearly 30 years. He looked tired now, thin, gray around the eyes, but his voice still carried weight. "Thank you all for coming," he said. Nobody answered. Rain tapped harder against the glass. Martin opened the folder in front of him carefully, almost respectfully. Shane noticed his father's name embossed in gold at the top. Walter J. Ford Estate Documents. Grant finally looked up from his phone. "So let's do this," he said. "I've got a board call at 4. Rachel gave a small smile. Evelyn didn't move at all. Martin ignored them. As outlined in Mr. Ford's final will and testament, dated March 11th, his voice became mechanical after that. Precise. Professional. The lake house on Lake Erie went to Evelyn. The investment accounts transferred to Rachel. Grant inherited operational control shares in Ford Industrial Systems pending board confirmation. Nobody looked surprised. Shane sat quietly. He had expected this. For years he had been treated like the branch of the family nobody displayed in photographs. Walter rarely defended him publicly, rarely called, rarely invited him into company discussions after Shane left the business almost 9 years earlier. The silence in the room wasn't grief. It was distribution, numbers, property, control. Martin reached the final page, and to his son, Shane Ford. Grant smirked before the sentence even finished. Martin reached into a small velvet case beside the folder. Inside sat an old Omega Seamaster watch. The steel was scratched. The bezel faded. The leather strap cracked near the buckle. It looked old enough to belong in a pawn shop display. Rachel blinked once. "That's it?" she asked. Grant laughed softly through his O's. "No," he said. "That actually makes sense." Evelyn finally spoke. Walter always believed sentimental things mattered to Shane. The sentence sounded polished, prepared in advance. Martin slid the watch across the table. Shane picked it up, carefully. It felt heavier than expected. Cold metal pressed into his palm. The second hand still moved. Tick, tick, tick. Grant leaned forward. "Dad finally gave you something you can't ruin." Rachel laughed quietly under her breath. Shane said nothing. That bothered Grant more than an argument would have. The room settled again. Rain. Clock ticking. Air vent humming overhead. Martin closed the folder slowly. Then he looked directly at Shane. Not at the family. Only Shane. And something changed in his expression. The professional mask disappeared for half a second. "Everyone else needs to leave the room," Martin said calmly. Nobody moved. Grant frowned first. "What?" Martin folded his hands together. "You heard me." Rachel looked irritated now. "If this concerns a state, matters legally, we're all entitled." "It concerns instructions from Walter Ford." Martin interrupted. "Specific instructions. For Shane alone." Evelyn's face remained controlled, but Shane noticed the smallest tightening near her jaw. Grant leaned back again. "Oh, come on." Martin didn't blink. Mr. Ford anticipated resistance to this request. The room became very still. Then Martin opened a side drawer and removed another sealed envelope. Red wax seal. Walter Ford's initials pressed into the center. U.F. Martin placed it on the table without opening it. "Your father was very clear," he said. "If anyone refused to leave, I was to contact probate court immediately and suspend the reading process." Grant stared at him. "You're serious?" "Yes." Rachel crossed her arms. "This is ridiculous." "Maybe," Martin said, "but those were his instructions." Evelyn stood first, smoothly, calmly. Her chair slid back across the hardwood floor with a soft scrape. "Let's not turn this into theater," she said. She picked up her handbag and walked toward the door. But before leaving, she looked directly at Shane for the first time all afternoon. Not sadness, not warmth, measurement. Like she was trying to calculate how much danger he represented. Then she left. Rachel followed next, visibly annoyed. Grant stayed seated longer. His eyes dropped to the watch in Shane's hand. Something cold passed across his face for just a second. Then it vanished behind another smirk. "You know," he said quietly, "Dad spent years regretting wasting time on you. Shane looked back at him without expression. Grant smiled wider. But congratulations on the antique. Then he walked out. The door shut behind him. The room immediately felt different, quieter, heavier. Martin waited until footsteps disappeared completely down the hallway. Then he stood up and walked to the conference room door himself. He locked it. Metal clicked softly. Shane watched him. Martin returned to the table without speaking. He loosened his tie slightly and sat back down. For the first time all afternoon, he looked nervous, not uncertain. Careful, he nodded toward the watch. Turn it over. Shane flipped it in his hands. The scratched steel backing reflected the pale ceiling lights. Martin reached into his jacket pocket and removed a tiny precision screwdriver. Your father brought me that watch 8 years ago, he said. He told me if anything happened to him before certain documents surfaced, I was to give it only to you. Shane frowned slightly. What documents? Martin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned forward and inserted the screwdriver into an almost invisible groove near the edge of the watch casing. A soft click. The back panel loosened. Martin carefully lifted it away. Inside the watch, hidden beneath the movement assembly, sat a tightly folded strip of paper, no bigger than a matchstick. Shane felt his pulse slow. Martin looked at him steadily. Your father believed someone inside your family was stealing from him, he said quietly. Then he slid the folded paper across the table. And he believed you were the only person he could trust. The paper was folded so tightly it looked brittle. Shane opened it carefully between his fingers while rain continued hitting the windows behind him. Inside were only 3 things: a 10-digit number, an address, and one sentence written in Walter Ford's sharp block handwriting. Trust documents, not blood. Shane stared at the words longer than he meant to. The handwriting pulled something loose in his memory. His father sitting at the kitchen counter years ago. Thick hands, stained with machine oil, filling out invoices with a black pen after midnight, while the factory still ran 3rd shift in Toledo. Walter Awe printed, instead of using cursive, said cursive gave dishonest people places to hide. Martin Keller watched Shane quietly from across the table. The number is for a safe deposit box, he said. First Federal Bank. Akron branch. Shane folded the paper once more. Why me? Martin leaned back slowly. Because your father stopped trusting everyone else. The words settled heavily into the room. Shane looked down at the old Omega watch in his palm. The second hand kept moving steadily, as if none of this mattered. Tick, tick, tick. When did he tell you will be all this? Shane asked. 8 years ago. That surprised him. 8 years! That was before Walter's stroke. Before the hospital stays. Before Grant officially took over day-to-day operations at Ford Industrial Systems. Before Shane stopped coming around. Martin removed his glasses and rubbed one eye. Your father believed money was disappearing from the company long before he became ill, he said. At first, he thought it was sloppy accounting. Then he thought it was theft. And he didn't call the police. He didn't know who he could trust. Shane gave a small, humorless smile. Apparently, not even me. Martin looked at him carefully. You left the company after the warehouse incident. Shane's jaw tightened slightly. The warehouse incident. That was what the family called it now. Like it had been weather. An accident. 9 years earlier, a hydraulic brake system failed inside Plant 2 outside Toledo. A shipment platform collapsed. One worker shattered his pelvis. OSHA got involved. The company quietly settled. Grant blamed Shane publicly inside the company within 48 hours. Said Shane ignored safety reports. Said Shane cut corners. Walter never defended him. Not publicly. A week later, Shane packed his toolbox into the bed of his truck and left. He never walked back into Ford Industrial Systems again. Martin studied him for a moment. Your father didn't believe you caused that accident. Shane looked up sharply. Martin continued. He hired a private investigator afterward. Silence. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere above downtown Cleveland. Shane's fingers tightened around the watch. Then why didn't he say anything? Martin hesitated. For the first time since this began, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. Because by then, he said quietly, your father believed somebody inside the family was actively positioning you to take the blame for larger problems. Shane felt the room narrow slightly. Not fear. Recognition. Small things suddenly resurfaced in his memory. Grant locking office doors whenever Shane entered accounting meetings. Invoices disappearing from shared desks. Walter abruptly ending conversations whenever Evelyn entered the room. And the hospital. Especially the hospital. The last 6 months before Walter died had become strangely controlled. Shane remembered arriving at Cleveland Memorial one night with coffee for his father, only to find Evelyn already outside the room speaking quietly with Grant. The moment Shane approached, both stopped talking. 10 minutes later, a nurse told him visiting hours were over, even though other families still remained inside. At the time, Shane assumed they simply didn't want him there. Now, he wasn't sure. Martin opened another folder from his briefcase. This stays with you, he said. Inside were photocopies, bank statements, corporate transfer records, handwritten notes from Walter. Some pages had yellow sticky tabs attached. Others contained circles in red ink. Shane flipped slowly through the stack. The same name appeared repeatedly. Blackridge Holdings, LLC. Transfer amounts varied. 40,000, 72,000, 125,000. Always approved internally. Always signed electronically. Shell company, Shane asked. Martin nodded once. Registered 3 years ago. By who? We couldn't prove it. Martin gave a tired smile. Your father didn't spend the last years of his life sitting quietly. Shane looked back at the papers. His father had built Ford Industrial Systems from a 2-bay repair garage in Dayton during the late 80s. By the time Shane was born, the company manufactured industrial cooling systems across Ohio, Indiana, and western Pennsylvania. Walter trusted machines more than people. Machines broke for reasons. People broke for opportunities. When did he know for sure? Shane asked. Martin was silent for a moment. 2 weeks before he died. The answer landed harder than Shane expected. Because that meant Walter spent his final days knowing someone close to him was stealing from him, possibly poisoning his company, possibly worse. Martin slid a small brass key across the table. Safe deposit key. Your father instructed me to give you that only after the will reading. Shane picked it up. Cold metal. Old scratches. Used often. There's more in the box. Yes. What exactly? Martin looked toward the locked conference room door before answering. Evidence. Shane frowned. What kind? The kind your father believed might get buried if the wrong people reached it first. The rain outside dumpied slightly now. Traffic moved below the building in blurred streams of red brake lights. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Martin leaned forward again. You need to understand something carefully, Shane. His voice dropped lower. Your father believed his signature had been forged at least twice during his hospitalization. Shane stared at him. What? There were changes made to power of attorney documents. Who made them? We don't know, officially. Officially. The word stood out. Martin continued. He wanted proof before accusing family publicly. That's why he created contingencies instead. Shane looked down again at the watch. A scratched old watch everyone in the room had laughed at 15 minutes earlier. And hidden inside it sat the first real thing his father had ever left directly to him. Not money, not property, responsibility. Martin stood slowly from his chair. You should go to Akron tonight. Tonight? Yes. Why? Martin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the window overlooking Euclid Avenue below. When he finally spoke, his tone had changed. More cautious, because your brother asked for copies of estate transfer records last week. Shane felt something hard settle in his chest. And because Evelyn contacted probate court before Walter was even buried. That silence said enough. Martin turned back toward him. If they suspect your father hid something, they'll start looking. Shane slipped the folded paper carefully into his wallet. Then he gathered the documents into a stack. What happens if I find proof? Martin looked directly at him. Then you'll understand why your father trusted the quiet son instead of the ambitious one. Shane stood. The old leather chair creaked beneath him. He slid the Omega watch onto his wrist for the first time. Heavy, solid. The ticking felt strangely loud against his skin. Martin unlocked the conference room door. Voices echoed faintly from somewhere down the hallway. Rachel speaking sharply. Grant laughing about something. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds. But Shane noticed something now that he hadn't before. Nobody in that family had cried today. Not once. Martin handed him the final sealed envelope. If they forced my signature, it read across the front. Shane slipped it beneath his jacket. Then he walked toward the elevator without another word. 3 hours later, rain hammered across Interstate 77 as his old pickup cut south through the darkness toward Akron. The windshield wipers squealed every few seconds. The highway was mostly empty. At 10:43 p.m., Shane finally pulled into the First Federal Bank parking garage. The building stood dark, except for security lighting near the entrance. Inside, a night manager verified his ID without conversation. Then a vault door opened with a deep mechanical click. Rows of steel boxes lined the walls. The employee stopped beside box 214. Shane inserted the brass key with steady hands. The drawer slid open slowly. Inside sat 4 things: a black USB drive, a thick folder of documents, an unloaded .38 revolver, and a sealed white envelope. Across the front, in Walter Ford's handwriting, were 6 words: "If they forced my signature." The motel sat beside Route 8, just outside Akron. 1 floor, flickering neon sign. Half the parking lot empty except for a plumbing van and a dark green semi-truck idling near the highway entrance. Shane carried the contents of the safe deposit box into room 17 shortly after midnight. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old cigarette smoke buried beneath years of cheap carpet cleaner. He locked the door twice. Then he spread everything across the small round table near the window. The old revolver, the folder, the USB drive, and the envelope. Rainwater dripped slowly from the sleeve of his jacket onto the carpet. For several seconds, Shane simply stared at the envelope. If they forced my signature. His father's handwriting looked firmer here than it had on the hidden note inside the watch. Strong. Controlled. Alive. Shane finally opened it carefully. Inside was a letter folded into thirds, several pages, typed except for the final paragraph. He began reading. Shane. If you are holding this, then I was right to worry. I wanted to believe I was becoming paranoid. Old men see enemies where there are none, but numbers do not lie, and machines do not hide intentions. People do. The first missing transfer appeared 4 years ago, small enough to dismiss. Then larger amounts disappeared through layered vendors and false maintenance contracts. I traced several of them myself. The company receiving the money is called Black Ridge Holdings, LLC. I believe Grant controls it through intermediaries. Shane stopped reading for a second, not because the accusation shocked him, because Walter had written it plainly. No hesitation, no excuses. Grant controls it. The motel heater rattled loudly beside the wall. Shane continued, I do not know how involved Evelyn is. I pray she is only protecting him and not participating herself. But I no longer trust the timing of certain legal documents placed before me during treatment. If my signature appears on emergency transfer authorizations dated during hospitalization, challenge them immediately, especially anything signed after October 14th. Shane's eyes narrowed slightly. October 14th. That was the week Walter lost consciousness after complications from a second stroke. Shane remembered standing outside the ICU holding untouched coffee, while Grant spoke privately, with doctors behind closed doors. He remembered Rachel telling him visiting restrictions had changed. He remembered feeling like an outsider at his own father's bedside. Now the memory tasted different, more organized, more deliberate. He turned the page. There is one more thing you need to understand. 9 years ago, The warehouse brake failure was not your fault. The sentence hit harder than anything else. So far. Shane slowly lowered the Mamer. Outside tires hissed across wet pavement, beyond the motel window. For years, that accident had followed him like a stain. Workers whispered. Managers avoided him. Grant publicly called him careless during internal meetings before OSHA even finished investigating. Walter said almost nothing. At the time, Shane interpreted silence as agreement. Now he kept reading. The hydraulic system was tampered with before inspection. I discovered this too late to undo what happened to you publicly. Grant insisted the company needed quick accountability to avoid lawsuits. I let him control the narrative. That was my greatest failure as your father. Shane's jaw tightened. Not anger. Something heavier. The realization that Walter had known. All these years. Known and stayed silent. The final paragraph was handwritten. You were never weak, Shane. You simply never learned to perform strength for greedy people. Trust documents, not emotions. Walter Ford. Shane sat motionless for a long time after finishing. The motel room seemed quieter now, except for the ticking watch on his wrist. Tick, tick, tick. Eventually, he reached for the folder. Inside were printed bank records organized by date. Walter had highlighted transactions in yellow marker. The pattern became obvious quickly. Money left Ford Industrial Systems through vendor payments tied to maintenance contracts that did not exist. Cooling systems, industrial calibration, equipment transportation. Most payments ranged between $50,000 and $90,000. Small enough individually to avoid immediate scrutiny inside a large manufacturing company. Together, they totaled millions. Shane flipped deeper into the file, then stopped. One document showed registration details for Black Ridge Holdings, LLC. Registered Agent R. Ford, Legal Consulting. Shane stared at the address beneath it. Downtown Cleveland, same office building where Rachel worked. The heater clicked off suddenly. Silence filled the room. Rachel. Not just Grant. Rachel, too. Or at least her law office. Shane leaned back slowly in the chair. He remembered Rachel graduating from Case Western Reserve University School of Law. Walter looked proud that day. Proud in the careful, restrained way he always showed emotion. 3 years later, she began handling internal corporate filings for Ford Industrial Systems, right around the time the money started disappearing. Shane rubbed a hand across his face. None of this felt dramatic. That was the worst part. No movie villain speeches, no obvious betrayal, just paperwork, quiet signatures, electronic transfers, people smiling at dinners while draining millions through invisible channels. He plugged the USB drive into the motel television. Several folders appeared. Audits, transfers, video. Shane. His eyes paused on the last one. He opened it first. Inside were scanned photos, old factory pictures, maintenance reports, performance evaluations. One video file dated 9 years earlier. Shane clicked it. Security footage appeared from inside Plant 2. Black and white. Silent. Timestamp running across the bottom. The warehouse platform. The hydraulic brake system. Workers moving crates. Then a figure entered frame wearing a company jacket. Not Shane. Grant. Shane leaned forward immediately. Grant crouched beside the brake assembly for almost 40 seconds before leaving frame. 2 hours later, according to the timestamp, the system failed. Shane stared at the screen without blinking. His pulse slowed instead of rising. That happened whenever he got angry enough. Everything inside him became still. He replayed the clip again and again. Grant clearly looked around before touching the brake housing. The footage quality wasn't perfect, but it was enough to raise questions. Enough to destroy the story Shane had lived under for nearly a decade. He opened another folder. More files, internal emails, accounting spreadsheets. One audio recording labeled OCT 14_hospital. Shane clicked it. Static crackled first, then voices, muffled, a hospital monitor beeping steadily in the background. Grant speaking quietly. He's barely conscious. A woman answered. Evelyn? That doesn't matter. Martin said the authorization still needs his signature tonight. Paper rustled. Then another voice entered weakly. Walter. Slurred, confused. What is this, Grant? Answered immediately. Insurance transfer forms, Dad. A long silence followed. Then the sound of a pen dropping onto a table. Shane stopped the recording. The motel room suddenly felt colder. Not because of the weather, because the voices sounded normal, not evil, not theatrical. Just calm people handling business around a dying man. That calmness made it worse. He leaned back again and looked toward the rain-covered window. Walter had known his family was turning against him while lying in a hospital bed, unable to fight properly. And instead of exploding publicly, he built evidence quietly, like setting traps inside walls. The ticking watch continued against Shane's wrist, his father's last machine still keeping time. Shane opened the final folder on the USB. A spreadsheet appeared listing outgoing transfers from Ford Industrial Systems over 4 years. One payment near the bottom caught his attention immediately. $480,000. Transferred 48 hours before Walter died. Recipient Black Ridge Holdings, LLC. Authorization attached. Shane opened the authorization form. His father's electronic signature appeared at the bottom, but the timestamp was impossible. Walter was already intubated in ICU that night. Shane remembered because he had stood outside Cleveland Memorial at 2 a.m. while snow fell across the parking garage roof. Grant told him their father was sleeping. Rachel told him not to upset the staff. Evelyn never even came outside to speak with him. Shane slowly closed the laptop. Then he looked down at the watch again. Everyone in that conference room had laughed at it earlier. An old scratched Omega, worthless, except the entire truth had been hidden inside it. And now Shane understood something else. Walter never intended to hand him revenge. He handed him proof. There was a difference. Then Shane's phone vibrated suddenly against the motel table. Unknown number. He answered carefully. Silence at first. Then a man's voice, low, distorted. You should stop looking into your father's business. Shane said nothing. The voice continued. People who dig too deep around Ford Industrial tend to disappear. Click. The line went dead. Shane lowered the phone slowly. Outside, headlights swept briefly across his motel window, then disappeared back into the rain. Shane left Akron before sunrise. Rain still covered northern Ohio in a dull gray haze, turning the highway into long ribbons of reflected headlights. His old pickup rattled slightly every time he crossed uneven pavement on Interstate 80. He barely noticed. The USB drive sat in the cup holder beside him. The Omega watch remained tight around his wrist. Tick, tick, tick. By 7:15 a.m., he exited near Toledo. Ford Industrial Systems Plant. Two stood on the edge of an aging manufacturing district, surrounded by rail lines, scrap yards, and empty warehouses with faded company logos peeling off brick walls. The factory looked smaller than Shane remembered, older. The giant Ford Industrial Systems sign near the entrance had lost 2 letters. Rust streaked down the support beams beneath it. But the smell hit him immediately when he stepped out of the truck. Machine oil, hot steel, coolant. It pulled him backward 9 years in a single breath. Back when third shifts still ran full crews. Back when Walter walked the floor himself every Thursday morning before sunrise. Back when Shane still believed he belonged here. A security guard near the gate recognized him almost instantly. Shane. The man stood from his booth slowly. Ronnie Becker, older now, more gray in the beard, still chewing sunflower seeds. Shane nodded once. "Haven't seen you in forever," Ronnie said. "Yeah." Ronnie glanced toward the main building. "You here for the funeral stuff?" "Something like that." The older man studied him carefully for a moment before buzzing the gate open. "You should talk to Luis if he's still around," Ronnie said quietly. "A lot changed after you left." Shane gave a small nod and walked inside. The factory floor sounded thinner than it once had. Fewer machines running, long pauses between hydraulic presses, too much empty space. Walter used to hate silence inside the plants. Said healthy factories sounded alive. Now, entire production lines sat dark. Dust coated some conveyor systems. Half the warehouse lighting remained off to save electricity. Shane walked deeper into the building slowly. Several workers glanced up as he passed. Some recognized him immediately. A few looked uncomfortable. Others simply looked tired. Near the back assembly area, an older Hispanic man stood beside a welding station checking inventory sheets. Luis Navarro, former floor supervisor. Walter trusted him for 20 years. Luis looked up, then froze. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. Shane stopped beside him. "Hey, Luis." Luis pulled off his safety glasses slowly. "You disappear almost a decade and suddenly walk back in here like yesterday." Shane gave the faintest smile. "Place still smells the same." Luis snorted quietly. "Yeah, bankruptcy and coolant." That answer told Shane more than any financial statement could. Luis glanced around before lowering his voice. "You shouldn't be here if Grant sees you." "I'm not hiding." Luis studied him another second. Then he noticed the Omega watch. Something shifted in his face immediately. That was Walter's. Shane looked down briefly. He left it to me. Luis stayed quiet after that, respectfully quiet. Finally, he gestured toward a side office overlooking the warehouse floor. Come on. The office windows were dusty enough to blur the factory below. Luis closed the door before speaking again. What's really going on? Shane placed the folder from Akron onto the desk. I think money's been disappearing from the company for years. Luis didn't even look surprised. That bothered Shane more than shock would have. How long? Shane asked. Luis sat down heavily in the chair across from him. After you left, Grant changed everything, he said. Started outsourcing maintenance, selling equipment, cutting inspections. Where did the money go? Luis shrugged once. Hell if I know. But vendors started appearing nobody had heard of before. Shane opened the folder and slid several highlighted transfer records across the desk. Luis leaned forward slowly. Blackridge Holdings, LLC. The older man frowned immediately. I've seen that name. Where? Shipping invoices, maybe. Maintenance contracts. Did they actually do work here? Luis gave a dry laugh. Not unless invisible mechanics count. Shane sat back quietly. Outside the office window, a forklift moved through the warehouse, carrying half-empty pallets of industrial tubing. Too much unused space surrounded everything. The company was bleeding. Luis rubbed a hand across his mouth. You know what the worst part is? He asked. Shane waited. Walter knew something was wrong near the end. I could tell. How? He started coming to the plant alone at night. That caught Shane's attention. Luis continued. He'd walk accounting reports down to the floor himself. Asked strange questions. Wanted old inventory records. Shane remembered something suddenly. 3 years before Walter's death, Shane had received a random voicemail from his father at 1:12 a.m. No greeting, no explanation, just one sentence. Always keep copies. At the time, Shane assumed Walter was drunk or exhausted. Now the sentence felt different, planned. Luis leaned closer. There's something else. Shane looked at him. The warehouse brake system that failed years ago. Silence settled briefly between them. Luis lowered his voice even more. I never believed you caused that. Shane said nothing. Luis pointed toward the far side of the plant. Maintenance logs disappeared 2 days before OSHA arrived. Grant handled it personally. A cold heaviness settled deeper into Shane's chest. Not surprise anymore. Confirmation. Luis opened one desk drawer and pulled out a faded clipboard. These are old shipping manifests I kept copies of, he said quietly. Didn't trust corporate after a while. Shane flipped through the papers. Several invoice numbers matched transfers from Walter's records. Blackridge Holdings appeared repeatedly. Equipment transportation. Emergency hydraulic repairs. Cooling component disposal. Millions in fake operational costs. Luis shook his head slowly. They stripped this company apart, piece by piece. Shane looked through the dusty office window again. Walter built Ford Industrial Systems from almost nothing. And while he lay in hospital rooms fighting strokes and medications, his own family had quietly hollowed the company out around him. Not with guns, not with violence, with paperwork. That almost made it uglier. A knock hit the office door suddenly. Both men looked up. A young employee stepped inside nervously. "Luis? Grant's here." The room went still. What? Luis asked. "He just pulled into the executive lot." Shane checked his watch automatically. 9:42 a.m. Too early for coincidence. Luis looked toward him carefully. "You expecting him?" "No." But Shane immediately thought about the phone call from the motel. Stop digging. Outside the office window, a black Escalade rolled past the factory floor entrance toward executive parking. Grant stepped out wearing a charcoal coat and sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. Even from this distance, his movements looked sharp and impatient. A second SUV followed behind him. Two men exited that vehicle too. Neither looked like executives. Shane noticed the way they scanned the building first. Security, or something close to it. Luis cursed quietly. "You need to go." Shane remained still. Below them, Grant entered the plant floor, speaking to a production manager while removing leather gloves. Then he suddenly stopped walking. His eyes lifted toward the office window, toward Shane. Even through dirty glass, Shane could see the exact moment Grant recognized him. No shock, no confusion, just irritation, like discovering a leak that should have stayed sealed. Grant said something to the two men beside him. Then he started walking directly toward the office staircase. Fast! Luis looked pale now. Shane. But Shane was already gathering the documents calmly. No panic. Walter's words moved through his head again. Trust documents, not emotions. The footsteps reached the metal stairs outside the office. Heavy. Quick. Then the office door burst open hard enough to hit the wall behind it. Grant stepped inside, breathing cold air and expensive cologne. His eyes dropped immediately to the papers spread across the desk, then to the watch on Shane's wrist. For the first time since the funeral, Grant stopped smiling completely. "You should have stayed out of this," he said quietly. Grant closed the office door behind him. Hard. The sound echoed through the small room overlooking the factory floor. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Luis remained near the desk, pretending to organize papers, but Shane could see tension in the older man's shoulders. The two men who arrived with Grant stayed outside the office door, their shadows visible through the wired glass panel. Grant removed his sunglasses slowly. "You don't work here anymore," he said. Shane leaned casually against the edge of the desk. "Neither does Dad." The sentence landed cleanly. Grant's jaw flexed once. Below them, forklifts moved through the warehouse, while hydraulic presses thundered at uneven intervals. Normal factory noise. Ordinary sounds. But inside the office, the air felt compressed. Grant looked at the documents spread across the desk. "Going through old records now?" he asked. Trying to play Detective Shane didn't answer immediately. That silence always irritated Grant more than arguments did. Finally, Shane said funny thing about records. "They remember everything." Grant gave a short laugh without humor. "You really think Dad left you something important?" Shane looked down briefly at the Omega watch on his wrist. Tick, tick, tick. Grant noticed the glance. For the first time, something uncertain moved behind his eyes. Tiny, quick, but real. You know what Dad's problem was near the end? Grant continued. He got paranoid. Sick people do that. Louise quietly stepped toward the door. I should get back downstairs. Grant didn't even look at him. Day. Louise stopped immediately. Grant turned his attention back toward Shane. Dad built a company, he said. A real company. Thousands of employees. Contracts across 3 states. He needed someone capable of running it, and that someone was you. Grant spread his hands slightly. Who else? The HVAC repair guy living over an auto shop. The insult came out practiced. Familiar. Shane remembered hearing versions of it his entire life. Not ambitious enough. Not polished enough. Not ruthless enough. Walter rarely argued against those judgments publicly. He simply watched quietly from a distance, while Grant performed confidence like a salesman in a showroom. Now Shane understood why. Grant stepped closer to the desk. What exactly did Martin Keller tell you? Shane met his eyes calmly. Enough. Grant smiled faintly. That old man's loyal to ghosts. No, Shane said quietly. He's loyal to paperwork. That answer erased the smile. For several seconds, the brothers simply looked at each other. Same father, different men entirely. Grant wore confidence externally. Expensive suits, sharp watches, loud certainty. Shane carried his differently, quiet, compressed, like weight buried under concrete. Grant finally glanced toward the documents again. Then he saw one page more clearly. Black Ridge Holdings, LLC. His expression changed almost invisibly. But Shane caught it. Grant noticed immediately that Shane caught it too. The room became colder after that. You shouldn't dig into things you don't understand, Grant said. I understand invoices. That's not what this is. Then explain it. Grant stepped closer again. Close enough now that Shane smelled coffee and expensive cologne beneath the rain on his coat. Dad was dying, Grant said quietly. The company was bleeding money. We made hard decisions. Grant didn't answer directly. That business survived because I kept it alive. Shane thought about the empty production lines downstairs, the darkened warehouse sections, the missing equipment. Alive wasn't the word he would have used. Grant suddenly looked toward Louise. Give us the room. Louise hesitated. Then he looked once at Shane before leaving the office silently. The door shut again. Now only the brothers remained. Grant lowered his voice. You know why Dad stopped trusting you? Shane said nothing. Because you walked away. The words stayed hanging there. Heavy, sharp. Grant continued. You left after the warehouse accident while the rest of us cleaned up the mess. For years, that accusation would have worked. Years ago, Shane might have reacted emotionally, defended himself, raised his voice. But now he had watched security footage. Now he had read Walter's letter. Now he understood silence differently. Interesting version of history, Shane said. Grant studied him carefully. You think you found something in those files? Shane looked directly at him. I think Dad did. That answer landed harder. Grant's expression flattened completely. For the first time since entering the office, he stopped pretending this was family tension. Now it felt like risk assessment. How much did Keller give you? Enough. Again that word. Again Grant hated it. The office remained silent except for factory noise below and rain ticking softly against the dirty windows. Then Grant's phone buzzed. He glanced down quickly. Shane noticed something unexpected. Not confidence, pressure. Grant declined the call immediately. Then another vibration hit almost instantly afterward. Same contact. Grant silenced it. That tiny detail mattered. Somebody else was nervous too. Grant slipped the phone back into his coat pocket. "You should listen carefully," he said quietly. "There are people connected to this company who won't care about family politics." Shane's expression didn't change. "You threatening me?" "I'm warning you." "No," Shane said. "Warnings sound honest." Grant stared at him for another second before stepping back. Dad always confused silence with strength, he muttered. Shane almost answered. Almost. But Walter's final letter stopped him. Trust documents, not emotions. Instead, Shane simply gathered the papers calmly into the folder. That seemed to frustrate Grant more than anything else, because there was nothing to fight against. No outburst, no scene, just evidence being organized. Grant opened the office door sharply. The two men outside straightened immediately. "Let's go," Grant said. But before leaving, he looked back once more at the Omega watch. Then he said something that stayed with Shane long after the SUVs disappeared from the factory lot. "If Dad left you that watch," Grant said quietly, "then he already knew this would become ugly." Then he walked away. The office stayed silent for several moments afterward. Finally, Luis returned slowly. "Well," he muttered, "that looked healthy." Shane stared through the office window toward the executive parking area below. Grant's Escalade pulled out first. The second SUV followed close behind. "Who were those guys?" Shane asked. Luis shook his head. "Consultants, maybe. They started showing up last year." "Consultants for what?" Luis gave a tired shrug. "Whenever people start using that word around factories, workers usually disappear." That answer sat badly in Shane's chest. He packed the remaining documents carefully back into the folder. Then his phone buzzed. "Martin Keller." Shane answered immediately. "Where are you, Toledo?" Martin exhaled sharply. "I just received a notice from probate court." Shane listened quietly. "Evelyn filed an emergency petition this morning requesting temporary restriction of estate-related materials. They moved fast." "Yes," Martin said, "too fast." Shane looked again toward the empty parking lot below. "They know something's missing." Martin lowered his voice. "There's more, Shane. I checked hospital access logs after we spoke yesterday." Shane waited. "Someone requested sealed medical administration records from Cleveland Memorial 3 days before Walter died." "Who? We don't know yet." Shane's eyes narrowed slightly. "Can we get them?" "Possibly. But there's someone you need to speak with first." "Who?" Martin paused. "A nurse named Dana Mercer." The name meant nothing to Shane initially. Martin continued. She worked night rotation in Walter's ICU wing, and she refused to sign portions of the medication verification report after his final hospitalization. Shane straightened slightly. Why? Because according to her unofficial statement, Martin said carefully, "Your father should not have been medically capable of signing legal documents that week." Silence settled between them. Below the office window, workers continued moving through the factory, unaware their company sat on top of something rotten. "When can I meet her?" Shane asked. "She's scared," Martin admitted. "She already ignored 2 calls from my office." "That bad?" "Yes." Shane looked again at the watch on his wrist. The second hand continued its steady movement. Walter planned all of this carefully, not emotionally, strategically, like a man leaving breadcrumbs before entering darkness. Martin finally spoke again. "One more thing. What I checked, the registration history for Blackridge Holdings." Shane waited. It wasn't just tied to Rachel's legal office. A pause. Some of the transfers passed through a medical consulting account connected to Cleveland Memorial Hospital. The room suddenly felt colder again. Not just corporate theft anymore. The hospital, too. Shane looked toward the rainy skyline beyond the factory windows. His father had died surrounded by people signing forms around his bed. And now the same name kept appearing everywhere. Blackridge, transfers, hospital records, emergency authorizations. The pattern was tightening. And somewhere inside it sat the truth Walter hid inside a scratched old watch. Cleveland Memorial Hospital looked colder at night. Not physically, emotionally. The white exterior lights reflected off wet pavement while ambulances moved in and out beneath the emergency entrance canopy, like silent machinery, following routines older than grief itself. Shane parked across the street near a closed pharmacy and watched the hospital for almost 5 minutes before going inside. The Omega watch sat beneath the cuff of his jacket. Tick, tick, tick. Dana Mercer had agreed to meet only after Martin Keller personally guaranteed the conversation would remain private. Even then, she chose the hospital cafeteria after midnight. Public enough to feel safe. Empty enough to talk. Shane found her sitting alone near the back vending machines, holding untouched coffee with both hands. Mid-40s. Thin face. Dark blonde hair tied back tightly. Hospital badge clipped beneath a navy cardigan. She looked up the moment he approached, and immediately looked toward the exits afterward. That told Shane enough already. "You're Shane?" she said quietly. He nodded once and sat across from her. For several seconds, neither spoke. A floor buffer hummed faintly somewhere down the hallway. Coffee machines clicked intermittently behind the counter. Dana finally exhaled slowly. "I almost didn't come." "Why did you—" She looked down at the table. "Because your father scared me before he died." That answer surprised him. She noticed. Not in a violent way, she clarified quickly. He was scared himself. That's what made it unsettling. Shane waited silently. Dana rubbed her thumb against the coffee cup lid. The last month he was here, he kept asking strange questions. What kind? Who entered his room? Which nurses were on shift? whether medication logs could be altered after administration. Shane's expression stayed neutral, but his attention sharpened immediately. Can they? Dana hesitated. With authorization, certain digital records can be updated without leaving evidence. She didn't answer directly. That answer was enough. Dana looked toward the cafeteria entrance again before lowering her voice. The night those legal forms were signed, she said quietly, your father should not have been fully coherent. Shane leaned back slightly. How bad was he? Bad enough that I filed concerns. What concerns Dana swallowed once. He'd received morphine less than an hour before. The fluorescent lights above them buzzed softly. Shane thought back to the audio recording from the USB drive. Walter's weak voice, slurred speech. What is this? Dana continued carefully. The dosage itself wasn't unusual for ICU care, but legal authorization documents should never have been presented under that condition. Who brought the documents, I don't know, officially. Officially? Again. Everyone kept using that word. But unofficially, Shane asked. Dana looked directly at him now. Your stepmother arrived first. Then your brother. Then someone from legal. Rachel. I don't know her name. Shane said nothing. Dana pulled nervously at the sleeve of her cardigan. I shouldn't even be talking about this. But you are. Because 2 days later she said quietly, someone asked me to amend part of the medication timeline. That sentence landed hard. Shane kept his face calm. Who a hospital administrator? Name. Donna hesitated longer this time. Michael Terrence. Shane memorized it instantly. What exactly did he want changed? The documented administration time. Why? He said there was confusion between paper logs and digital entries, and you believed that no. The answer came immediately. Dana looked exhausted suddenly, like someone who had spent too long carrying around a memory she wished belonged to someone else. I've worked ICU for 16 years, she said quietly. People manipulate paperwork after deaths all the time. Insurance claims, liability concerns, family disputes, but this felt different. She nodded slowly. Your father kept trying to tell people something. Shane felt a slight tightening in his chest. What do you mean? Dana stared into her untouched coffee. The last time I saw him awake, he grabbed my wrist. Her voice lowered almost to a whisper. He asked me whether clocks could be trusted. The Omega watch suddenly felt heavier against Shane's skin. Donna noticed his expression. I didn't understand what he meant then. Shane looked down briefly at the table. Neither did he, until now. Dana reached into her bag carefully. Then she slid several folded photocopies across the table. Medication administration logs, highlighted sections, handwritten notes in blue ink. I kept copies, she said. Shane looked through them slowly. October 14th. Morphine administered at 8:12 p.m. Another sedative at 8:47 p.m. Legal authorization signature time-stamped 9:03 p.m. Shane's eyes narrowed slightly. Walter should barely have been conscious. Dana pointed toward another section. Look here. Shane saw it immediately. The digital record showed the morphine administered at 10:26 p.m. instead, more than an hour later. Someone had altered the timeline. Who had access to modify this, Shane asked. Department administration, certain legal compliance staff. Could Grant numbered someone connected to hospital administration? Could. Shane remembered Martin mentioning a medical consulting account linked to Black Ridge Holdings. The pattern kept tightening. Dana suddenly looked toward the cafeteria entrance again. A man in gray hospital scrubs walked through carrying a clipboard. She visibly stiffened until he passed. You're afraid, Shane observed quietly. Dana gave a weak smile. You should be, too. Silence settled between them. Then Shane asked the question sitting underneath everything else. Did my father know they were changing records? Dana took a long time answering. Finally, she nodded once. The night before he lost consciousness, he asked me for a pen. Shane waited. He wrote something on a napkin. What I never saw clearly. He folded it before anyone else entered. The watch again. It had to be. Walter had already begun preparing the hidden message. Dana leaned forward slightly. You need to understand something carefully, Shane. Her voice became steadier now. People with money don't panic the way normal people do. They organize. Quietly. That sounded exactly like Walter. And maybe exactly like Grant, too. Shane studied the medication logs again. Proof didn't look dramatic. It looked boring. Numbers, timestamps, tiny inconsistencies. But courts respected boring evidence. Walter understood that. Donna suddenly reached into her bag once more. This time, she removed a hospital visitor access sheet. Printed names. Entry times. Security clearance signatures. Officially, these records were archived, she said. Unofficially, I made copies before they disappeared. Shane took the paper carefully. 3 names appeared repeatedly on ICU access during Walter's final week. Evelyn Ford, Grant Ford, Michael Terrence, and near the bottom of October 14th, Rachel Ford. Entry at 8:41 p.m. Only minutes before the signature authorization. Shane stared at the time stamp silently. Dana watched him carefully. You didn't know she was there, she said. It wasn't a question. No, Shane answered quietly. And somehow, that hurt worse than Grant. Because Rachel used to sneak into Shane's room as a kid during thunderstorms, used to borrow his old hoodies in high school, used to sit beside him in Walter's workshop while he repaired engine parts late at night. Now her name sat inside manipulated hospital records. Dana checked the time nervously. I can't stay longer. Shane nodded. Before standing, she looked directly at him one last time. Your father wasn't confused near the end, she said quietly. That's what bothered people. Then she left quickly. Through the side cafeteria exit, Shane remained seated alone. The cafeteria lights reflected off the wet windows outside. For several minutes, he reviewed every copied page carefully. Medication discrepancies, visitor records, altered timestamps. Enough to raise serious questions already. And somewhere above him in this hospital, Administrators still worked overnight shifts while pretending none of it happened. His phone vibrated suddenly. Text message. Unknown number. Stop asking questions about the hospital. Another message arrived immediately afterward. Your father couldn't protect himself. You can't either. Shane stared at the screen. No anger, no panic, just stillness. Then he slowly saved screenshots of both messages. Evidence. Always keep copies. Walter's voice seemed almost audible now. Shane finally stood from the cafeteria table. As he walked toward the parking garage exit, he passed the ICU elevators where he had once spent nights sitting alone with cold, vending machine coffee, waiting for updates nobody gave him honestly. Back then he thought he was grieving. Now he realized something worse. He had been managed. Outside freezing rain hit his jacket immediately. Across the street, his old pickup sat beneath a flickering parking light. But before Shane reached it, he noticed something that stopped him cold. A black SUV idled half a block away, engine running, lights off. And inside the windshield glow, he could barely make out a familiar silhouette in the driver's seat. Grant, watching the hospital entrance, watching him. The black SUV remained parked across the street for exactly 11 seconds after Shane noticed it. Then the headlights turned on. Grant pulled away calmly into traffic without speeding. No confrontation, no threats shouted through rolled-down windows, just presence, a reminder. Shane stood in freezing rain, watching the taillights disappear past Euclid Avenue before climbing into his truck. The heater groaned weakly when he started the engine. He placed Dana Mercer's copied records carefully onto the passenger seat beside Walter's folder. Then he drove north toward Cleveland Heights. Martin Keller lived alone in a brick colonial house near Cedar Road, surrounded by bare winter trees and patches of dirty snow piled against curbs. The porch light was already on when Shane arrived. Martin opened the door before he even knocked. "You were followed," the attorney said immediately. "Probably." Martin stepped aside without another word. The house smelled like old books and cedar wood. Framed legal certificates lined the hallway beside black and white photos of Martin standing with judges, politicians, and business owners across 4 decades in Ohio courtrooms. Walter appeared in several of the pictures. Younger, thicker shoulders, hard eyes. Shane had almost forgotten. His father used to smile occasionally. Martin led him into a study near the back of the house where legal files covered nearly every flat surface. A fire crackled quietly in the stone fireplace. Shane handed him the copied medication logs first. Martin adjusted his glasses slowly while reading. Then his expression hardened. "They altered administration timestamps," he said quietly. "Yes. And Dana Mercer gave you these willingly. She's scared. She should be." Martin looked toward the fire for several seconds. Then he placed the records carefully, beside another stack of documents already waiting on the desk. "You were right," Shane said. "Rachel was there the night the signatures happened." Martin closed his eyes briefly. Not surprised, disappointed. "That complicates things," he admitted. "Did Dad know?" "I don't think he knew how involved she was." Shane remained silent after that. Martin opened another folder from the desk drawer. This arrived 2 hours ago from probate court. Inside sat official legal notices, emergency filing requests, temporary confidentiality petitions, restrictive discovery motions. Shane scanned them quietly. They're trying to slow everything down. They're trying to bury it before formal litigation begins, Martin corrected. The attorney removed his glasses again. Grant moved faster than I expected. Why? Because he's afraid of something specific. Martin stood and walked toward a filing cabinet near the wall. When he returned, he carried a sealed manila envelope marked Confidential, Trust Addendum. He placed it on the desk carefully. Walter instructed me not to open this unless evidence of fraud appeared, Martin said. Shane looked at the envelope. Open it. Martin broke the seal slowly. Inside sat 3 pages. Corporate trust language, transfer contingencies, and one signed authorization from Walter Ford dated 7 years earlier. Martin read silently for several moments. Then he looked up directly at Shane. Well, he said quietly, that explains the watch. Shane waited. Martin slid the document across the desk. If financial misconduct involving executive leadership is proven, he read all controlling operational shares of Ford Industrial Systems transfer immediately to Shane Ford, acting trustee. Silence settled heavily through the room. The fire cracked softly nearby. Shane looked down at the paper again. Not inheritance. Contingency. Walter had prepared for betrayal years in advance. He trusted me with the company, Shane asked, quietly. Martin gave a faint, tired smile. No, he trusted you not to destroy it. That answer sounded exactly like Walter. Practical, unsentimental. Martin sat back slowly. Your father believed. Grant understood profit, but not responsibility. And me, he believed you understood consequences. Shane looked again at the trust documents. Millions of dollars. Factories, contracts, workers. All quietly balanced behind legal conditions, hidden inside a scratched old Omega watch. Martin folded his hands together carefully. There's another problem. Shane looked up. If these documents activate, Grant loses almost everything. That's his problem. No, Martin said quietly. It becomes ours when desperate people start protecting themselves. The attorney turned toward his computer monitor and opened a financial report already displayed on screen. Several highlighted transfers filled the spreadsheet. Victor Hale found these this afternoon, Martin said. Who's Victor Hale, forensic accountant? Former IRS Financial Crimes Unit. Shane studied the numbers. Offshore transfers, layered shell accounts, international routing chains. Martin pointed towards several highlighted entries. Blackridge Holdings received company money first, he explained. Then portions moved through consulting accounts tied to Cleveland Memorial. After that, funds disappeared into Cayman subsidiaries. How much? Martin hesitated. At least 18 million so far. The number sat heavily in the room. Ford Industrial Systems had been gutted quietly over years, while employees accepted wage freezes and equipment failures. Martin continued. Victor believes the operation expanded after Walter's second stroke, because Walter couldn't monitor it anymore. Shane understood immediately. The company didn't collapse accidentally. It was harvested. His phone vibrated suddenly. Evelyn. First call since the funeral. Shane looked at the screen silently. Martin noticed. "You should answer." Shane accepted the call. Evelyn's voice came smooth and controlled as always. "Shane, Evelyn, we need to stop this before it becomes embarrassing. Not emotional. Not grieving. Strike." Shane leaned back slightly in the chair. "What exactly are we stopping?" A small pause. Then she changed direction immediately. "Your father loved all of you differently." That sentence almost sounded rehearsed. "You think Dad hid evidence inside a watch because he loved people differently?" Shane asked. Silence. Then Evelyn spoke again, colder now. "You don't understand corporate law." "Maybe not. You're being manipulated by Martin Keller." Shane glanced toward the attorney, who remained expressionless beside the fire. "Interesting," Shane said quietly. "That's exactly what Grant said about Dad before he died." Another pause. This one longer. Evelyn lowered her voice. "Come to the house tomorrow night. Why we should speak privately, before lawyers turn this family into headlines." There it was. Fear of exposure. Not guilt, not remorse, public damage. Shane stared at the fire while thinking. Walter never reacted emotionally when dealing with problems. He collected information first, observed, documented, then moved carefully. "Fine," Shane said finally. Martin looked up immediately. Evelyn sounded relieved. 7 o'clock. The line disconnected. Martin stood. "That dinner isn't reconciliation." "I know. It's containment." Shane nodded once. Martin walked toward a bookshelf near the far wall and removed a small digital recorder still sealed in packaging. Then he handed it over. "Ohio is a one-party consent state," he said quietly. "You can legally record conversations you participate in." Shane took the recorder. Small, simple, another tool, another piece of preparation. "Walter bought that 6 years ago," Martin added. Shane looked at him. He expected this. "I think your father expected eventually being forced to defend himself against his own family." The fire crackled again softly. Outside, snow had begun falling across Cleveland. Shane slipped the recorder into his jacket pocket beside the Omega watch. Tick, tick, tick. Martin lowered his voice one final time. "Grant will make a mistake soon." "Why?" "Because people stealing millions believe they're smarter than everyone around them." Shane looked down at Walter's documents spread across the desk. Evidence, timelines, transfers, hospital records, not revenge, structure. Walter built a legal trap years before dying. And now, piece by piece, Shane was walking through it exactly as intended. Then Martin's phone rang sharply from the desk. He answered immediately. His expression changed within seconds. "What happened?" he asked. Silence. Then when Shane watched carefully, Martin slowly lowered the phone after the call ended. His face looked older suddenly. "What is it?" Martin looked directly at him. That was Dana Mercer. A pause. "She says someone broke into her apartment tonight." The fire popped loudly behind them. Martin's next sentence came low and steady. And whoever did it knew exactly where she kept the copied hospital records. Snow covered the Ford estate by the following evening. The house sat above the frozen shoreline of Lake Erie, like something from an architecture magazine. Glass walls, and the limestone columns, warm yellow lighting glowing through giant windows, while the rest of Cleveland disappeared beneath winter fog. Shane parked beside 3 luxury vehicles, already lining the circular driveway. A black Escalade, Rachel's white Audi, Evelyn's silver Mercedes. The same family, different battlefield. He sat inside his truck for a few seconds before stepping out into the cold. The digital recorder Martin gave him rested inside his jacket pocket, already running. Tick, tick, tick. The Omega watch remained tight against his wrist beneath his sleeve. A housekeeper opened the front door before he knocked. Shane immediately smelled expensive candles and roasted garlic from the dining room. Everything inside looked untouched by grief. Clean, organized, controlled. Evelyn stood near the fireplace, wearing a cream-colored sweater and pearl earrings instead of funeral black this time. Grant leaned against the wet bar, pouring bourbon. Rachel sat at the dining table, scrolling through something on her phone. Nobody smiled when Shane entered, but nobody acted openly hostile either. That made the room feel even less honest. "Thank you for coming," Evelyn said smoothly. Shane removed his jacket slowly. "You said it was important." Grant handed himself another drink. "It is if you care about avoiding public disaster." Rachel finally looked up from her phone. "You've been talking to Keller nonstop," she said. "And now people inside the company are nervous." Shane sat at the far end of the dining table. Maybe they should be. The statement settled heavily into the room. Evelyn moved first, always controlled, always redirecting. "This family has already suffered enough," she said carefully. "Walter is gone. Whatever confusion existed during his illness doesn't need to become a legal circus." Confusion. Interesting word. Shane leaned back slightly in the chair. Was the forged signature confusion? To Grant's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Rachel looked sharply toward him. Evelyn remained calm. No signatures were forged. Then Dad was fully coherent under morphine silence. Outside wind rattled lightly against the lake-facing windows. Grant finally spoke. "You're building stories from incomplete records." "Am I?" Grant walked toward the dining table slowly. "You don't understand how complicated Dad's final months became," he said. "The company was unstable. Vendors were threatening lawsuits, payroll issues, debt restructuring, and $18 million disappearing offshore probably didn't help." The sentence hit hard enough to freeze the room completely. Rachel stood immediately. What Grant looked at Shane coldly now. "You've been digging through confidential financials." "No," Shane said quietly. "Dad was. That landed differently. Because everyone at the table knew Walter's intelligence. His attention to detail. His habit of documenting everything quietly." For the first time that evening, uncertainty appeared across Evelyn's face. Tiny, quick, but visible. Grant recovered first. "You have no idea what those transfers were for. Then explain Black Ridge Holdings." Rachel's eyes immediately moved toward Grant. Small movement. But Shane noticed. So did Evelyn. Nobody answered. The silence itself became evidence. Grant set his bourbon glass down harder than necessary. Corporate structures use shell entities all the time. For what? Tax mitigation, liability separation, hospital consulting too. Rachel inhaled sharply. Grant's eyes narrowed. And there it was. The exact pressure point. Shane stayed perfectly still. No accusations, no yelling, just facts placed carefully onto the table, like tools. Walter would have approved. Evelyn sat down slowly now. Who told you about the hospital people who still know the difference between records and lies? Rachel crossed her arms tightly. You're accusing us of criminal fraud based on photocopies and emotional assumptions. No, Shane said. I'm accusing you based on timestamps. Again, silence. The house suddenly felt colder despite the fireplace burning nearby. Grant stepped closer. You think Dad trusted you? He asked quietly. Shane looked directly at him. He trusted evidence. Grant's jaw flexed once. You walked away from this family. No, Shane answered calmly. I was pushed out after the warehouse accident. That accident nearly killed someone. And you were seen near the brake assembly 2 hours beforehand. Rachel looked immediately toward Grant again. This time openly. Grant stared at Shane without blinking. What footage? Interesting. Not denial. Not outrage. What footage? Shane noticed Evelyn noticing it too. Grant realized the mistake half a second late. The room remained silent long enough for everyone to feel it. Then Rachel spoke carefully. Grant, I don't know what manipulated garbage he found. Grant snapped. The crack in his composure came fast. Too fast. Shane watched him carefully now. Grant always controlled rooms through volume and certainty. But underneath that confidence sat something unstable. Walter probably saw it years ago. People like Grant looked strongest, right before panic started leaking through. Evelyn immediately stepped in. Enough, she said sharply. The room quieted again. Then she turned toward Shane. What do you want, direct now? Practical, not emotional. Shane almost respected that. He looked around the dining room slowly. Family portraits lined the far wall. Walter shaking hands beside governors. Walter at factory openings. Walter beside Grant at business conferences. Only one photo included Shane. He looked about 16 in it. Standing in the background of Walter's workshop, wearing welding gloves. Evelyn followed his gaze. Walter made mistakes with all of you, she said quietly. No, Shane answered. He made calculations. That sentence changed something. Rachel lowered her eyes briefly. Grant looked furious now. But Evelyn became very still, because she understood what Shane meant. Walter hadn't left the watch by accident. This entire situation was engineered years earlier. Grant suddenly laughed once. Short. Sharp. You think you're going to take the company? Shane didn't answer. Grant walked toward him until they stood only a few feet apart. You fixing air conditioners for apartment buildings? he said quietly. You don't run corporations. No, Shane agreed. I fix systems before they collapse. That one they hit harder than shouting would have. Rachel looked away completely after that. Evelyn finally spoke again, lower this time. There are ways to settle this privately. Money. There it was. Shane looked at her. How much? Grant stared sharply toward Evelyn. Wrong reaction again. She ignored him. You sign confidentiality agreements, she said carefully. Walk away from probate disputes. Martin Keller stops pursuing corporate discovery. And in return, we make sure you're compensated fairly. Shane almost smiled. Not because of the offer, because Walter predicted every step perfectly. First dismissal, then pressure, then containment through money. He leaned back in his chair calmly. You know what Dad understood better than all of you, nobody answered. That people start negotiating when evidence scares them. The room went dead silent. Grant slammed his hand onto the table, hard enough to shake silverware. You have no evidence. Rachel flinched visibly. Evelyn closed her eyes for half a second. Another mistake. Another emotional crack. Shane remained completely still. Then he said the most dangerous sentence in the room. I haven't even shown you what Dad hid yet. Nobody moved after that. Not immediately. But Shane saw it happen. Real fear, not about losing arguments. About not knowing what Walter Ford left behind. Grant recovered first. Barely. You're bluffing. Maybe. Grant stared at him another second before suddenly turning away toward the bar. He poured another bourbon, with unsteady hands this time. Rachel noticed, too. So did Evelyn. And Shane understood something important in that moment. Grant wasn't fully in control anymore. Not of the company. Not of the story. Not even of himself. Then Shane's phone vibrated inside his pocket. Martin Keller. He answered immediately. Shane Martin said quietly. Victor Hale finished tracing the final transfer. Shane listened silently. Martin's next sentence froze the room around him completely. The money moved into an account opened under Walter Ford's medical power of attorney authorization. Shane looked slowly across the dining room toward Evelyn, then Rachel, then finally Grant. And Grant suddenly looked less like an executive and more like a man realizing the walls were starting to close. Nobody spoke after Martin Keller's phone call. The silence inside the Ford estate stretched long enough for the sound of ice hitting the lake outside to become noticeable through the glass walls. Grant stood near the bar, gripping a bourbon glass too tightly. Rachel remained frozen beside the dining table. Evelyn sat perfectly still. Only Shane moved. He slipped the phone back into his jacket pocket calmly and stood from the table. The digital recorder continued running silently beneath his coat. Tick, tick, tick. The Omega watch pressed cold against his wrist. What account? Evelyn finally asked. Shane looked at her. You already know. Her expression didn't break, but she didn't answer either. Grant stepped forward immediately. This conversation is over. No, Shane said quietly. This is the first honest conversation this family's had in years. Grant's face darkened. You think you can walk in here with conspiracy theories and threaten us? I don't need theories anymore. That landed differently, because everybody in the room understood the distinction. Shane picked up his jacket from the chair. I'm done talking tonight. Grant blocked the dining room entrance immediately. The movement came too fast, too aggressive. You're not taking company documents anywhere. Shane stopped, looked at him calmly. Move. No. For a moment, the brothers stood only feet apart while snow blew sideways outside the enormous windows overlooking Lake Erie. Grant spoke first. You have no idea how many people depend on this company. Shane's eyes stayed steady. Then maybe you shouldn't have stolen from it. Grant shoved him suddenly, hard enough to force Shane one step backward, against the edge of the table. Rachel gasped softly. Evelyn stood immediately. Grant. But Grant's anger had finally outrun his control. You always thought being quiet made you smarter, he snapped. You disappear for years, fix broken heaters, then suddenly think Dad chose you. Shane straightened slowly, still calm. That calmness unsettled Grant even more, because Shane wasn't reacting emotionally anymore. He was observing, recording, collecting, exactly like Walter. Grant realized it too late. You know what Dad really thought about you? Grant continued. He thought you were weak. Shane looked directly at him. No, he said quietly. He thought I'd wait before acting. The sentence landed cleanly. Grant swung first. Fast. A sharp right hook fueled more by panic than technique. Shane moved just enough. The punch clipped his shoulder instead of his face. Crystal shattered somewhere behind them as Grant slammed partially into the dining table. Rachel shouted his name. Evelyn rushed forward immediately. But Shane didn't hit back. He simply stepped away, controlled, measured. That somehow made Grant look worse, because now he appeared exactly what he actually was. Not powerful, unstable. Grant pointed toward the front door, breathing hard. Get out. Shane picked up his jacket homely. You should call your lawyer before probate court opens Monday morning. Then he left, so hammered across the driveway as he walked toward his truck. Behind him, the Ford estate glowed warm and expensive against the frozen shoreline. A beautiful house filled with frightened people. Shane sat behind the wheel for nearly a minute before driving away. Only once he reached the main road did he remove the recorder from his pocket and stop the audio, every word, every threat, every reaction. Saved. Walter had been right. Truth mattered more when people exposed themselves naturally. By midnight, Shane sat inside Martin Keller's study again, while Victor Hale connected his laptop to a large monitor beside the fireplace. Victor looked exactly like someone who spent 20 years chasing financial crimes. Late 50s, thin frame, wire rim glasses, no wasted movement, no wasted words. He acknowledged Shane with a small nod before reopening spreadsheets across the screen. I traced the October transfer, Victor said. Numbers filled the monitor. Routing chains, corporate identifiers, authorization signatures. It started here, Victor explained, pointing toward a Ford Industrial Operating account. Moved through Blackridge Holdings. then through a medical consulting intermediary connected to Cleveland Memorial. Michael Terrence Shane asked. Victor looked surprised, briefly. You know the name? We've heard it. Victor nodded once. After the hospital intermediary account, the funds moved into a Cayman holding structure. He clicked another file open. But this is where things became interesting. A scanned authorization document appeared. Walter Ford Medical Power of Attorney Authorization. Signed electronically. Time-stamped October 14th, 9:03 p.m. Exactly during Walter's ICU medication window. Victor zoomed further into the metadata. Digital signatures leave fingerprints, he said calmly. IP access points. Device identifiers. Login routing. Another window appeared beside the authorization. Login location. Ford Industrial Executive Office. Shane stared at the screen silently. Not the hospital? The company office. Grant. Victor adjusted his glasses. Whoever executed the transfer used credentials linked to your father's executive authorization privileges. But the login came from company headquarters. Martin leaned forward slowly. That alone may establish fraudulent execution. Victor nodded. Combined with altered medication records. Yes. Shane remained quiet. Not because the information shocked him anymore, because the structure finally looked complete. The hospital. The forged authorizations. The offshore accounts. The shell company. Years of careful extraction hidden behind corporate paperwork. Walter hadn't imagined it. He documented it. Victor opened another file. This is where it gets worse. The spreadsheet showed maintenance reduction schedules across Ford industrial plants. Safety inspections delayed. Insurance reserves reduced. Vendor liabilities rerouted. Victor pointed toward Plant 2 in Toledo. The warehouse accident 9 years ago coincides with the first unauthorized insurance diversion. Shane looked up sharply. Victor continued. The accident created legal restructuring opportunities, emergency reserve reallocations, reduced oversight. Martin slowly removed his glasses. Grant used the accident to restructure company authority. Victor nodded once, and likely to isolate Shane from operations. The room became very still. For years, Shane believed he left because he failed. Now he understood something uglier. He had been removed. Strategically. Walter probably figured it out too late. Victor clicked open one final report. A board meeting notice appeared. Ford Industrial Systems Emergency Executive Session. Scheduled Monday morning. Purpose sale, authorization vote. Shane frowned slightly. Sale of what? The company Victor answered. Martin stood immediately. No. Victor nodded grimly. Grant's trying to liquidate controlling assets before formal probate litigation begins. Everything accelerated suddenly. That explained the dinner. The panic, the pressure. They weren't just protecting reputations anymore. They were running out of time. Martin walked toward the fireplace slowly. If Grant sells majority operational divisions before the trust challenge activates, he buries evidence inside acquisition restructuring. Victor finished. Shane leaned back in the chair quietly. Outside, snow continued falling across Cleveland. Inside the study, Walter's entire final strategy suddenly became visible: the watch, the hidden trust addendum, the evidence trail. He never intended Shane to fight emotionally. He intended him to survive long enough for systems to work. Victor closed the laptop halfway. "There's one advantage," he said. "What the board doesn't fully trust Grant anymore." Martin looked up. Victor continued. "Several members know the company's financials stopped making sense after Walter's second stroke. Can we stop the sale?" Victor looked directly at Shane now. "Yes." How Victor slid a folder across the desk. "Forensic audit request. Emergency injunction preparation. Preliminary fraud analysis. You walk into that board meeting Monday morning," Victor said calmly, "and force them to look at the numbers before Grant controls the narrative." Martin nodded slowly. "And once official review begins, the trust addendum activates, meaning Walter's contingency finally becomes legal." Shane looked down at the Omega watch again. His father built all of this silently, while everyone around him underestimated him. Maybe because quiet men often looked harmless right before they changed everything. Then Martin's phone buzzed again sharply. He checked the screen. His expression hardened immediately. "What now?" Victor asked. Martin looked toward Shane. "That was probate court." A pause. "Grant filed emergency allegations accusing you of stealing confidential corporate property." The fire cracked loudly. Behind them, Martin's next words came colder. "And he's requesting a temporary restraining order before Monday's board meeting." By Saturday morning, snow covered most of Cleveland in silence. The city looked cleaner after storms, quieter, like bad things temporarily disappeared beneath white layers. But Shane knew better now. Some damage hid deeper when covered. He stood outside the Cuyahoga County Justice Center just after 8 a.m., while freezing wind pushed snow across Superior Avenue in sharp waves. Martin Keller adjusted his scarf beside him. "Grant filed aggressively," the attorney said. "Emergency petition. Temporary restraining request. Claims you illegally obtained protected company data." Shane looked up at the gray courthouse building. He moved fast. "He's trying to keep you away from Monday's board meeting." Victor Hale joined them carrying 2 banker boxes filled with audit records. "And if the restraining order sticks," Victor added, "Grant gets 48 uninterrupted hours to finalize the sale process." Meaning, evidence could disappear, accounts could close, documents could be buried inside corporate restructuring. Walter probably predicted this too. Inside the courthouse, everything smelled like wet coats, floor polish, and burnt coffee from vending machines. The emergency hearing lasted less than 40 minutes. Grant arrived with 2 attorneys from Chicago, wearing dark tailored suits and expressions polished by expensive billable hours. Rachel sat behind them quietly. Evelyn did not attend. Interesting. Grant avoided looking directly at Shane, while the judge reviewed preliminary filings. But Shane noticed something else. Grant looked exhausted, not physically, mentally. People carrying lies for too long developed a certain tension around the eyes. Constant calculation, constant anticipation. Martin presented calmly. No emotional speeches, just facts. Shane possessed no original company servers, no unauthorized database access, no stolen hard drives, only copied records tied directly to estate review and trust execution procedures. The judge denied Grant's emergency restraining request within minutes. Insufficient basis, but she scheduled a formal evidentiary hearing for later that week. Temporary victory, nothing more. Outside the courtroom, Grant approached Shane near the elevators while attorneys spoke privately down the hallway. "You think this changes anything?" Grant asked quietly. Shane buttoned his coat against the cold. "I think you're running out of time." Grant smiled faintly, but the confidence looked thinner now. "You still don't understand how businesses survive." "No," Shane answered. "I understand how they die." Grant's jaw tightened again. Then Rachel appeared beside him, carrying folders against her chest. For a second, she looked like she wanted to say something. Instead, she simply avoided Shane's eyes completely. That bothered him more than hostility would have. The siblings rode the elevator down in silence. 3 people standing together, who no longer felt remotely like family. Outside, reporters already waited near the courthouse steps after hearing rumors about internal Ford industrial disputes. Grant immediately turned away toward his Escalade. Rachel followed halfway before stopping unexpectedly. "Grant," she said. He looked back impatiently. "We need to talk later." Something in her tone made him pause, but only briefly. Then he nodded once and left. Rachel remained standing near the courthouse entrance, while snow drifted around them. Shane started walking toward his truck. "Shane." He stopped. Rachel approached slowly, close enough now for him to see dark circles beneath her eyes. "You shouldn't trust Martin Keller completely," she said quietly. "Interesting opening. Why?" "Because Dad hid things from everybody, even him." Shane studied her carefully. "Were you there the night the documents got signed?" Rachel looked away immediately toward the street traffic. "That's not simple." "It's simple enough for timestamps." She crossed her arms tighter. "You think you're the only person Dad manipulated?" The sentence landed strangely. Not defensive. Tired. Rachel looked suddenly less like a corporate attorney and more like someone trapped inside a collapsing structure. "Grant told me the transfers were temporary," she said quietly. "He said the company was protecting assets during acquisition negotiations." "Did you believe him?" "At first." Snow collected lightly in her dark hair while traffic moved slowly through slush nearby. Shane waited silently. Rachel looked toward him again. "You always think silence makes you hard to read," she said. "Walter used to say the same thing." That realization hit Shane unexpectedly. Rachel exhaled slowly. "There's something—" At Dad's old workshop, Shane's attention sharpened immediately. "What I don't know exactly." Then why mention it? Because Dad went there alone 3 days before his second stroke. That mattered. Walter rarely visited the old workshop near Dayton anymore, after moving operations to larger facilities. Rachel continued carefully. He asked me to notarize sealed storage transfer papers. What papers I never saw inside the box. Shane watched her closely now. "Where is it?" Rachel hesitated. Then she handed him a small brass key from her coat pocket. "Storage locker key, Unit 214, Midwest Industrial Storage." "Dayton, I shouldn't be giving you this," she said quietly. "Why are you?" Rachel looked toward Grant's disappearing SUV tracks in the snow. "Because something stopped making sense after Dad died." That was the closest thing to honesty she had offered yet. Before Shane could ask more, her phone rang. Grant. She stared at the screen. Didn't answer. Then she looked back at Shane one final time. "Be careful around the hospital records," she said softly. "There are people involved who never worked for Ford Industrial." The statement chilled him more than the weather. Then Rachel walked away into the snow without another word. By late afternoon, Shane reached Dayton. The old workshop sat behind an abandoned tool distributor near the industrial outskirts of the city. Walter started Ford Industrial Systems here nearly 40 years earlier. The building looked forgotten now. Faded paint, rust around the loading door, snow drifting across cracked asphalt. But when Shane unlocked the side entrance, the smell hit him instantly. Machine oil, welding dust, cold steel. Home. The workshop remained almost untouched. Old drafting tables, manual tools hanging neatly on pegboards, shelves filled with labeled bolts and bearings, in Walter's handwriting. Shane moved slowly through the space. Memories surfaced everywhere. Walter teaching him how to rebuild compressor valves at 14. Long nights repairing broken equipment during winter contracts. The rare moments his father spoke more through work than conversation. Near the back wall stood Walter's original metal workbench, and resting on it sat a faded red toolbox Shane hadn't seen in years. He opened it carefully. Inside lay old socket sets, wrenches, oil-stained manuals, and beneath them, a photograph. Shane froze. The picture showed Walter standing beside teenage Shane inside this exact workshop. Both wore welding masks pushed up onto their heads. Walter's arm rested awkwardly across Shane's shoulder. Neither smiled much, but both looked comfortable. On the back of the photograph, Walter had written something in black marker. "The quiet ones hear everything." Shane stared at the words for several seconds. Then he noticed another folded paper hidden beneath the photo. A letter. Unfinished. "Shane, if you ever find this, it means things became uglier than I hoped. Grant believes strength means controlling rooms. Rachel believes intelligence means controlling paperwork. Evelyn believes survival means standing beside whoever wins. But you never chased control. That may save this company after I'm gone." Shane lowered the letter slowly. The workshop remained completely silent. except for distant wind rattling against metal siding outside. Then he noticed something else inside the toolbox. A flash drive taped beneath the bottom tray, different from the Akron USB. Older, labeled only with one word, board. Shane removed it carefully. At that exact moment, tires crunched outside the workshop building. Not one vehicle, several. Headlights swept suddenly across the frosted windows. Then engines shut off almost simultaneously. Shane went still immediately. Outside car doors opened, and a voice he recognized shouted through the freezing dark. Shane? Grant. The workshop lights remained off, except for the single lamp above Walter Fard's old workbench. Dust floated through the yellow glow, while headlights swept across the frozen windows outside. Grant shouted again. Shane, open the damn door. Shane stayed perfectly still. The second flash drive rested cold in his hand. Bored. Outside, at least 3 vehicles idled in the snow. Too many for a family conversation. Too deliberate. Shane slipped the drive into his jacket pocket beside the Omega watch. Tick, tick, tick. Then he folded Walter's unfinished letter carefully and placed it back inside the toolbox. Another knock hit the metal door harder this time. Shane. Not fear, pressure. Grant sounded like a man running out of time. Shane finally walked toward the entrance, slowly. When he opened the side door, freezing air rushed immediately into the workshop, carrying snowflakes and exhaust fumes. Grant stood 10 feet away beneath the security light. 2 black SUVs idled behind him. The same men from Toledo remained near the vehicles, watching silently. Grant looked exhausted now, hair slightly disordered, coat half-buttoned. The polished executive image was starting to crack. "How did you find this place?" Shane asked calmly. Grant ignored the question. "You shouldn't be here." "Interesting." "Not." "You need to leave. You shouldn't be here." Like the building itself contained something dangerous. Snow crunched beneath Grant's shoes as he stepped closer. "Rachel talked to you. Again, not a question." Shane leaned against the doorway. "She's smarter than you think." Grant gave a sharp, humorless laugh. "No, Rachel's emotional. Dad always knew that." Shane watched him carefully. Even now, Grant framed everything as strengths and weaknesses, assets and liabilities. Human beings translated into management language. Walter probably saw that years ago, too. Grant glanced past Shane into the workshop interior. Then his eyes narrowed slightly. "What did you find?" There it was. Fear again. Real fear. Shane said nothing. Grant exhaled sharply and looked toward the SUVs before lowering his voice. "You don't understand the people attached to this anymore." Hospital people that landed immediately. Grant's expression tightened. Shane continued. "Michael Terrence, offshore accounts, medical authorization transfers." Snow blew sideways across the empty industrial street. The 2 men near the SUVs exchanged quick glances. Grant noticed Shane noticing them. Then he stepped even closer. You need to stop talking to hospital staff. Why? Because some of them won't hesitate to protect themselves. Not denial again. Warning. Grant kept accidentally confirming things every time panic pushed him too fast. Shane looked directly at him. Did Dad know? For the first time all night, Grant looked away. Toward the dark workshop windows. Toward the snow-covered parking lot. When he finally answered, his voice sounded quieter. He knew enough to become a problem. The sentence sat heavily between them. Not just business anymore. Not greed alone. Walter became a problem. Shane felt something inside him settle colder after hearing that. Not rage. Clarity. Grant rubbed one hand across his mouth tiredly. You think I wanted any of this? You signed the transfers. I kept the company alive. At what cost? Grant laughed again. This time, it sounded genuinely exhausted. You still believe companies survive because people tell the truth? Shane remained silent. Grant looked toward the workshop interior again. Dad built something too large to maintain honestly anymore. That sentence revealed more than Grant intended. Walter built the company. Grant monetized its collapse. Different philosophies entirely. Shane spoke quietly. The warehouse accident wasn't random. Grant froze slightly. Only slightly. But enough. You have footage, he said. Again, not a question. Shane said nothing. Grant closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, the anger seemed thinner, almost replaced by resignation. That worker would have bankrupted the company, he muttered. The cold air between them suddenly felt heavier. You sabotaged the brake system, Shane said quietly. Grant's silence confirmed everything. No dramatic confession, no shouting. Just a man too tired to keep denying what another man already understood. Shane stared at him. 9 years. 9 years. Carrying blame that never belonged to him. Grant looked back toward the SUVs again nervously, then lowered his voice further. You need to leave Cleveland for a while. Why? Because once this hits court officially, nobody controls what happens next. Shane's eyes narrowed slightly. Nobody. Grant looked toward the workshop ceiling, as if searching for patience. There are investors tied into Blackridge, he said quietly. Medical contracts, procurement chains, political donations. You sold Dad's company into that. I stabilized it. The words sounded pathetic now. Grant suddenly stepped closer again. Listen carefully. If you walk into Monday's board meeting with those files, they'll destroy you personally before anything reaches trial. Shane almost smiled. Dad thought you'd say that. Grant's expression shifted immediately. What else did he leave? There it was again. Not grief over Walter. Fear of what Walter prepared. Shane reached into his pocket slowly. Grant tensed instantly. But Shane only removed the Omega watch slightly from beneath his sleeve. The scratched steel reflected pale security light. Walter's watch. Grant stared at it silently. Funny thing, Shane said quietly. Everyone laughed at this during the will reading. Grant didn't answer. Dad trusted this more than he trusted any of you. Snow continued falling around them. Then one of the men near the SUVs suddenly approached. Large build, dark coat, military posture. "Grant," he said low enough that Shane barely heard. "We need to go." Grant looked irritated immediately. 5 minutes. "No," the man answered firmly. "Now." That changed the atmosphere instantly. Because Grant actually listened. Not like an executive. Like someone subordinate. The realization sharpened something dangerous inside Shane's mind. Grant wasn't leading this alone anymore. The man glanced toward Shane briefly. Cold eyes. Professional eyes. Then he looked toward the workshop interior. Did he get inside? Grant hesitated half a second too long. The man noticed. So did Shane. The stranger took one step closer toward the doorway. "Mr. Ford," he said calmly to Shane, "you should stay out of property disputes that don't concern you." Property disputes. Interesting phrasing. Not family matters. Not inheritance. Property. Shane looked directly at him. "My father built this place." The man's expression didn't change. "Exactly," he said. That answer carried weight Shane couldn't fully identify yet. Grant moved quickly after that. "We're leaving." The stranger kept watching Shane another moment before finally stepping back toward the SUV's engines remained running. "Ready." Grant lingered only briefly near the doorway. Then he spoke quietly enough that the others couldn't hear. "Rachel doesn't know everything," he said. Shane waited. Grant swallowed once. "Dad found something bigger than company theft before he died." That sentence changed everything again. Shane's attention sharpened immediately. What Grant looked genuinely conflicted now. Then headlights suddenly flashed at the end of the street. Another vehicle approaching fast. The stranger near the SUVs reacted instantly. "Move." Everything accelerated. Doors slammed. Engines revved. Grant looked once more toward Shane. "You should have taken the watch and walked away," he said quietly. Then the SUVs pulled up out into the snowy street, just as another car turned the corner sharply toward the workshop. Martin Keller's sedan. The attorney stepped out immediately after arriving. One of Victor's contacts called. He said breathlessly, "We need to leave. Now." Shane looked back toward the disappearing SUVs. What happened? Martin's face looked pale beneath the falling snow. Victor Hale's office was broken into an hour ago. The workshop suddenly felt much less abandoned, much less forgotten. Martin continued quickly. Hard drives are missing. Filing cabinets forced open. Was Victor there? No. But whoever did it knew exactly what they were searching for. Shane glanced once more toward Walter's old workbench inside the building, toward the hidden flash drive in his pocket, toward decades of quiet preparation his father left behind. Then Martin said the sentence that changed the direction of everything. "Shane, the board meeting isn't the real target anymore." A pause. "They're trying to erase the entire evidence chain before court opens." They drove back to Cleveland. Before dawn, snow hammered the interstate hard enough to erase lane markings in places, forcing Martin Keller to grip the steering wheel tightly as trucks crawled through the storm, with hazard lights blinking. Shane sat silently in the passenger seat. The flash drive labeled bored remained inside his jacket pocket. Walter's final hidden piece. Tick, tick, tick. The Omega watch continued moving steadily beneath his sleeve. Martin glanced toward him briefly. What did Grant say? Not enough. That usually means he said something important. Shane looked through the windshield at the white blur swallowing the highway ahead. He admitted the warehouse accident wasn't random. Martin's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. God. He also implied the company theft connected to people outside Ford Industrial. Martin nodded slowly. I was afraid of that. Shane turned toward him. How deep does this go? Martin remained quiet for several seconds. Then your father started suspecting procurement, fraud tied to hospital construction contracts 3 years ago. That caught Shane's attention immediately. Martin continued carefully. Ford Industrial didn't just manufacture cooling systems. We handled infrastructure contracts for medical facilities throughout Ohio. Cleveland Memorial. Yes. Snow scraped loudly across the windshield. Martin lowered his voice. Walter believed inflated maintenance contracts were being used to move money through legitimate infrastructure projects. Laundering. Martin didn't answer directly, but silence confirmed enough. By 4:12 a.m., they reached Victor Hale's office building near downtown Cleveland. Police tape blocked the front entrance. One patrol cruiser remained parked outside beneath flashing blue lights reflecting across wet pavement. Victor stood near the entrance speaking with officers. He looked furious. Not emotional, precise, controlled anger. The dangerous kind. They knew exactly what to take, Victor said once Shane and Martin approached. Anything recoverable? Martin asked. Victor handed over a printed inventory sheet. Primary servers, untouched. They ignored computers entirely. Then what physical evidence backups? Victor pointed toward the list. Original audit notes. Handwritten tracing maps. Cross-reference binders. Printed account chains. The thieves targeted only material difficult to recreate quickly. Professional. Planned. Victor looked toward Shane. Did anyone else know about the evidence outside this room? Shane thought about Grant. The SUV's the stranger. No, he said quietly. But they knew enough. Victor nodded grimly. That means they're escalating. Inside the office, overturned filing cabinets littered the floor. Drawers emptied. Boxes ripped open. But computers still sat untouched on desks. That told Shane everything. This wasn't panic. It was cleanup. Martin closed the office door behind them. Show him the drive, he said. Shane removed the flash drive from his jacket and handed it over. Victor inserted it into a secure laptop immediately. Several files appeared. Board _ audio. Board _ ledger. Private _ memo. Victor opened the audio file first. Walter Ford's voice filled the office speakers. Older. Tired but sharp. If this recording is being played, then events have unfolded exactly as I feared. Shane felt the room tighten instantly around the sound of his father's voice. Walter continued. Ford Industrial Systems is being hollowed out from inside under the appearance of strategic restructuring. Grant believes he's protecting the company through aggressive acquisition tactics. He is wrong. Victor paused the recording briefly. He knew. Martin nodded slowly. Walter always knew more than he admitted publicly. Victor resumed playback. The individuals attached to Blackridge Holdings are not businessmen. They are financial intermediaries, specializing in debt extraction through infrastructure manipulation. Shane frowned slightly. What does that mean? Victor answered quietly, without taking his eyes off the screen. It means they intentionally weaken companies, load them with artificial liabilities, then profit during restructuring and acquisition. Walter's voice continued. Grant thinks he joined investors. In reality, he invited parasites. The room remained silent, except for the speaker audio and distant police radios outside the building. Then Walter said something that changed everything again. Cleveland Memorial was never the final objective. The hospital contracts were leveraged to access state procurement, expansion projects beginning next fiscal cycle. Victor paused the recording immediately. Martin looked stunned. Jesus Christ. Victor leaned back slowly. This wasn't just company theft. Shane stared at the frozen audio screen. How big? Victor answered carefully. Potentially federal. The office suddenly felt smaller. Walter had uncovered something far larger than family fraud before his death. And Grant either didn't fully understand what he got involved in, or understood perfectly. Victor opened the ledger files next. Complex routing maps appeared across the monitor. Dozens of shell entities, consulting groups, medical procurement chains. Several names repeated constantly. Blackridge Holdings, Terrence Medical Advisory Group, North Coast Infrastructure Partners. Then Victor froze suddenly. What Victor zoomed into one highlighted authorization signature. This account. Shane stepped closer. The account belonged to a holding company tied to infrastructure financing. But one authorized signer stood out immediately. Evelyn Ford. Martin stared hard at the screen. She knew. Not suspected. Not manipulated. Knew. Shane remained silent, because emotionally the revelation barely shocked him anymore. The patterns already pointed there. Victor opened another file, a scanned memo written directly by Walter. If Shane receives this, trust him with operational control immediately. He still understands the difference between building something and exploiting it. Martin rubbed a hand slowly across his face. Walter prepared for war. No, Shane said quietly. Everyone looked toward him. He prepared for systems. That was the important difference. Walter never trusted emotions to win. He trusted records, timelines, procedure. Victor suddenly turned the monitor toward them again. There's more. A board voting schedule appeared on screen. Monday morning, 9 a.m. Emergency Executive Authorization Session. Acquisition vote. Victor pointed toward the listed attendees. 2 board members already intended voting for the sale. 3 remained undecided. If Grant secures one more vote, Victor explained the acquisition proceeds before probate litigation freezes the structure. Martin looked toward Shane immediately. You need those undecided votes. How Victor opened financial summaries by showing them enough evidence to scare them legally. That made sense. Board members protected themselves first. Always. Especially when fraud investigations approached. Then Victor's phone buzzed sharply. He answered immediately. His face changed within seconds. What happened? Martin asked. Victor lowered the phone slowly. That was Dana Mercer. Shane's attention sharpened instantly. Victor continued. Hospital administration suspended her access badge tonight. Retaliation. Clean up again. Dana talked. Now consequences arrived. Victor's jaw tightened. She says internal auditors are already modifying archived ICU logs, destroying evidence in real time. Martin looked toward Shane. We're running out of space between discovery and erasure. Shane looked down at Walter's watch. Tick, tick, tick. His father understood this phase would come, the point where people stopped pretending, where systems either protected truth or buried it permanently. Victor suddenly minimized the financial spreadsheets and opened the final file on Walter's drive. A video recording appeared. Time stamped. 11 days before Walter died. Walter sat alone in his office, older, weaker, but his eyes remained sharp. He looked directly into the camera. Shane, if you're seeing this, then I failed to stop them quietly. The office became completely still. Walter continued. I know people think Grant is the danger. He isn't. He's only the doorway. A long pause. Then Walter said the sentence that froze all three men in the room. The real money started moving after someone inside Cleveland Memorial realized dying patients create perfect legal timing windows. Victor slowly stopped the video. Nobody spoke. Outside the office, snow continued falling across Cleveland, while police lights flashed against frozen streets. Inside, the entire shape of the story finally changed. This was never only about inheritance, or greed, or family betrayal. Walter Ford died while uncovering a system that used illness itself as opportunity. And now Shane understood exactly why his father hid everything inside a scratched old watch instead of trusting anyone alive. Then Martin's phone rang again. Unknown number. He answered cautiously, listened. His face hardened instantly. What is it? Shane asked. Martin lowered the phone slowly. That was one of the Ford Industrial Board members. A pause. He says Grant moved the acquisition vote up. Victor frowned. To when Martin looked directly at Shane. 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Ford Industrial Systems headquarters overlooked the frozen Cuyahoga River like a monument built for stronger years. By 7:12 a.m. Monday morning, black sedans ready lined the executive parking lot while snow drifted across the glass entrance in thin waves. Inside the boardroom, lights burned bright. Lawyers, executives, financial advisors. Everyone arrived early because everyone sensed danger. Shane stepped out of his pickup wearing the same dark work jacket he used for HVAC calls across Cleveland. Victor Hale carried 2 hard cases behind him. Martin Keller walked beside them, holding a thick binder marked trust activation materials. The Omega watch remained steady against Shane's wrist. Tick, tick, tick. Security stopped them immediately inside the lobby. "Board meeting is restricted today," the guard said nervously. Martin handed over legal paperwork calmly. "Not anymore." The guard scanned the documents. His expression changed instantly. Then he stepped aside. People inside the elevator avoided eye contact during the ride to the executive floor. Rumors had already spread through the building. Fraud, probate disputes, hospital investigations. Board members hated uncertainty more than scandal, because scandal threatened reputation. Uncertainty threatened money. The executive boardroom doors opened at exactly 7:56 a.m. Conversation stopped immediately when Shane entered. Grant stood near the far end of the room, beside a projection screen displaying acquisition documents for something called North Point Infrastructure Group. Rachel sat silently near the legal team. Evelyn remained near the windows overlooking the river, dressed in dark gray instead of black. Now, none of them looked surprised to see Shane anymore, only tense. That mattered, because disbelief had finally disappeared. Now they understood the threat was real. Grant recovered first. "This meeting is private." Martin stepped forward. "Not under the Walter Ford Trust contingency clause." Several board members looked up sharply. One older director removed his glasses. "What contingency clause?" Victor placed hard cases directly onto the conference table. Grant's face tightened immediately. "Martin," he said carefully, "you're making a serious mistake." "No?" Martin answered quietly. Walter Ford prepared for one. The room remained still. Then Shane finally spoke. "Before any acquisition vote happens," he said calmly, "the board deserves to understand why company assets have been disappearing through fraudulent transfer chains tied to hospital procurement contracts. Silence. Not dramatic silence. Dangerous silence. The kind built from executives realizing lawyers might eventually subpoena everything in the room. Grant stepped forward sharply. "These accusations are baseless." Victor opened one hard case. Inside sat organized audit binders, timestamp reports, banking metadata charts, and transfer maps. Not emotional claims. Evidence. Board members immediately leaned forward, because numbers frightened corporate people more than shouting ever could. Victor connected a laptop to the projector. The acquisition presentation disappeared. Walter Ford's financial tracing charts replaced it. Blackridge Holdings, LLC. Offshore transfers. Medical intermediary accounts. Digital authorization records. One board member whispered softly, "Jesus Christ." Grant looked toward the projector with visible fury now. These are manipulated interpretations. Victor zoomed into the authorization metadata. The October 14th transfer originated from executive office credentials, while Walter Ford was medically incapacitated in ICU care. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. Evelyn remained motionless near the windows. Victor continued calmly. "We also recovered altered medication timestamps from Cleveland Memorial records." Several directors immediately turned toward legal counsel. Now fear entered the room fully. Not moral outrage, liability. Martin placed another document onto the table. The Walter Ford Trust Addendum activates upon evidence of executive financial misconduct. One board member frowned. What does that mean exactly? Martin looked directly toward Shane before answering. It means operational control authority transfers immediately to Shane Ford, pending court review. That exploded across the room harder than any accusation so far. Multiple voices erupted at once. Grant slammed his hand against the table. This is insanity, No Shane said quietly. It's procedure. Again, the exact word Walter would have respected. Procedure. Grant looked toward the board desperately now. These people are weaponizing grief and selective accounting. Victor calmly opened another file. Security footage from Plant 2 appeared on the projector. Black and white footage. Time-stamped 9 years earlier. Grant near the hydraulic brake assembly. The warehouse accident. Several board members immediately recognized the footage. Grant went pale. That footage is incomplete. Victor didn't respond emotionally. He simply advanced frames carefully. Grant touching the brake housing. Grant checking the hallway. Grant leaving. The room remained utterly silent afterward. Not because the footage proved criminal sabotage definitively, because it proved deception. And once board members smelled deception, survival instincts took over fast. Evelyn finally moved away from the windows. Walter knew about that footage, she asked quietly. Martin answered. He discovered it years ago. The room shifted again. Walter knew. Walter documented. Walter prepared. Grant suddenly looked toward Rachel. Say something, she stared at the table. Rachel. Still, she said nothing. Then finally, I told you the hospital records would surface eventually. Grant froze. Several board members looked sharply toward her. Rachel's voice remained low. I thought we were stabilizing temporary liquidity issues, she said quietly. I didn't know the transfers expanded beyond infrastructure restructuring until after Dad's second stroke. Grant stared at her in disbelief. You're doing this here? Rachel looked up slowly. You should have stopped. That sentence destroyed him more than the audits did. Because betrayal only hurt when it came from people still standing beside you. Grant stepped backward slowly. For the first time all morning, he looked genuinely alone. Victor opened Walter's final recorded message next. Walter appeared on screen, tired, but steady. If this message is playing publicly, then Shane followed instructions correctly. Board members listened silently. Walter continued. He understands patience. He understands systems. Most importantly, he understands that companies survive through trust, not extraction. Grant looked physically sick now. Walter's final words filled the boardroom softly. Do not mistake polished ambition for leadership. The video ended. Silence remained afterward. Snow drifted beyond the boardroom windows, overlooking Cleveland below. Finally, the oldest director at the table spoke. What exactly are our legal exposures here? There it was. Not family, not morality. Business reality. Victor answered directly. Potential fraud conspiracy, fiduciary violations, financial concealment, medical authorization, misconduct. Another director removed his wedding ring unconsciously while thinking. Shane noticed. People preparing psychologically for legal damage often touched personal objects without realizing it. Grant suddenly straightened again. Last attempt. You think giving the company to him fixes this? He pointed directly at Shane. He's not qualified. Shane looked at him calmly. You're right. The room quieted immediately. I'm not a corporate strategist, Shane continued. I'm a systems repair technician. Grant almost smiled. Then Shane finished. And every system I've repaired started with someone ignoring small failures until the structure collapsed. That landed perfectly. Because everyone in the room now understood Ford Industrial itself had become a failing system. Shane looked around the table slowly. My father built something real, he said quietly. You turned it into an extraction machine. Nobody interrupted. Because now the evidence outweighed personalities. Martin finally slid the final trust activation document forward. Under the contingency provisions, he said, I'm formally requesting emergency suspension of executive authority, pending probate review. The oldest board director looked toward the others, then toward Grant, then toward Shane. Outside, snow continued falling across the river below. Inside, decades of control balanced on a single decision. Finally, the director spoke. All executive transfer actions are suspended effective immediately. Grant stared at him. No. But nobody defended him anymore. The director continued. Pending investigation, operational authority transfers temporarily under trust supervision. He looked directly toward Shane. Mr. Ford, that means you. The room stayed silent. After that, not victorious, not triumphant, just exhausted. Because justice rarely sounded dramatic in real life. Usually it sounded like signatures moving across paper, while frightened people avoided eye contact. Grant slowly sat down in his chair. The polished executive mask, finally, gone. And for the first time since Walter Ford died, the quiet son nobody respected now controlled the room. 3 weeks later, the first shift returned to Plant 2 in Toledo at full capacity for the first time in nearly 4 years. Now still covered the parking lots in dirty piles near loading docks, but smoke rose steadily again from the exhaust stacks above the factory roof. Machines sounded alive. Not rushed, not overloaded. Working. Shane stood alone on the upper catwalk, overlooking the production floor, while weld sparks flashed beneath him in bright blue bursts. The same workers who once watched him leave in silence now nodded when they passed below. Not because he won, because the company had stopped bleeding. That mattered more. Ford Industrial Systems remained under temporary trust supervision, while state investigators and federal financial auditors worked through the evidence chain Walter Ford had left behind. The headlines grew uglier every week. Procurement, fraud investigation expands. Cleveland Memorial executives subpoenaed. Offshore transfer network linked to industrial contracts. Grant Ford resigned from all executive positions. 3 days after the board meeting. 2 days later, federal investigators froze multiple Black Ridge Holdings accounts. Michael Terrence disappeared briefly before attorneys negotiated his surrender through legal counsel in Chicago. Evelyn rarely appeared publicly anymore. Rachel cooperated with investigators immediately. Nobody inside the company celebrated any of it. Because once investigations start even innocent, employees begin fearing paperwork. Victor Hale now occupied Walter's old executive office, temporarily rebuilding internal compliance systems from scratch. Martin Keller handled trust litigation almost non-stop. And Shane spent most mornings walking factory floors instead of sitting behind executive desks. That confused people at first. Executives expected dramatic leadership shifts after corporate coups, new suits, public speeches, aggressive restructuring. Instead, Shane replaced broken systems quietly. He restored maintenance schedules, reopened delayed safety inspections, canceled offshore consulting contracts, rehired older mechanics. Grant pushed into retirement to reduce labor costs. Every decision looked small individually. Together, they stabilized the company within weeks. Walter would have understood that approach perfectly. Because machines failed gradually, long before collapse became visible. So did companies. One afternoon, Shane drove alone back to Dayton. The old workshop stood exactly where it always had, cold, quiet, untouched by corporate scandals and court filings. He unlocked the side entrance slowly. Dust still floated through the yellow overhead light above Walter's workbench. The same faded red toolbox remained where he left it. The same smell of steel, oil, and welding dust filled the room instantly. Home again. Shane walked toward the bench and placed the Omega watch carefully beside an old vice grip. Tick, tick, tick. The sound echoed softly through the workshop. For a while, he simply stood there looking at it. The scratched steel case, the worn leather strap, the hidden compartment that changed everything. Everyone laughed at the watch during the will reading, because people always underestimated ordinary-looking things. Walter understood that too. A quiet sun, an old workshop, a scratched watch. Real value rarely announced itself loudly. The side door opened softly behind him. Rachel stepped inside, wearing a dark winter coat dusted with snow. Shane didn't seem surprised. "You still walk too quietly," he said. Rachel gave a faint, tired smile. "You still notice everything anyway." The workshop remained silent for several seconds. Then Rachel looked toward the watch on the bench. "Dad wore that every day when we were kids." Shane nodded once. He trusted it. "I think he trusted you." That answer stayed hanging quietly between them. Rachel moved farther into the workshop, slowly looking around at old tools and faded shelves. "I used to hate this place," she admitted softly. "Why?" "Because Dad acted different here." Shane understood immediately. Walter looked calmer inside workshops than inside boardrooms, less guarded. Rachel ran her fingers lightly across the edge of the workbench. "I thought Grant was protecting the company," she said. "By the time I realized what was happening, I kept convincing myself it wasn't as bad as it looked. Shane stayed silent, not because he forgave her completely, but because excuses no longer mattered much now. The truth already existed independently. Rachel finally looked toward him. "Do you hate me?" Interesting question. Shane thought about it honestly, then shook his head once. "No." That answer surprised her. "I was angry," he admitted quietly. "But hate requires energy. I'd rather spend fixing what's left." Walter probably would have answered the same way. Rachel nodded slowly. "I'm helping investigators now." "I know. They're building federal cases." "I know." She exhaled shakily. Grant still thinks he can negotiate his way out. Shane looked toward the watch again. Grant spent too many years believing control mattered more than consequences. Outside, winter wind rattled softly against the metal siding. Rachel reached into her coat pocket and removed a folded envelope. "He left this with his attorney yesterday." Shane took it carefully. Grant's handwriting. Inside sat only one sentence: "Dad trusted the wrong son." Shane stared at the paper quietly, then folded it once and placed it beside the watch. "No," he said silently. "Dad trusted the only son who wasn't trying to win." Rachel looked at him for a long moment after that. Then she nodded once. No argument. Because somewhere deep down, she finally understood it too. After she left, Shane stayed alone inside the workshop until evening. Snow began falling again outside as daylight disappeared slowly across Dayton. He opened Walter's old toolbox one final time. Inside, beneath the unfinished letter and old photographs, sat a small metal business card holder Shane somehow missed before. Inside were dozens of handwritten names: factory workers, managers, maintenance staff, people Walter trusted. Not executives, not investors, workers. Shane smiled faintly to himself. Even at the end, Walter still thought like a builder instead of an owner. The workshop lights hummed softly overhead while snow thickened outside the windows. Finally, Shane picked up the Omega watch again and fastened it back onto his wrist. Tick, tick, tick. Still moving, just like everything else. Before leaving, Shane shut off the overhead lights and paused beside the doorway for one final look at the workshop. For years he believed Walter left him behind, forgotten him, buried him beneath blame and silence. But now he understood something different. Walter never left him wealth. He left him responsibility, proof, patience, and the choice to become a different kind of man than the ones who destroyed themselves chasing power. Outside, snow covered the empty street in white silence. Shane locked the workshop door carefully behind him and walked toward his old pickup beneath the falling Ohio snow. And on his wrist, the watch Walter Ford trusted more than people kept perfect time. For years, Shane believed silence meant weakness because that's what louder people kept teaching him. But the truth is, quiet people often notice the things everyone else misses. They listen longer. They react slower. And when the time finally comes to act, they usually already understand the entire room. Walter Ford understood something most people never learn in time. Evidence matters more than emotion. Anger burns fast. proof lasts. That's why he didn't leave Shane money or speeches or revenge. He left records, timelines, documents, a watch, carrying the truth hidden inside something everybody underestimated. Real life works like that more often than people admit. Families break quietly before they explode publicly. Businesses collapse slowly before headlines notice. And sometimes, the person everybody dismisses ends up being the only one patient enough to hold things together when everything starts falling apart. So here's the question. If people underestimated you for years, what would you do once the truth finally came out? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you stayed with this story all the way to the end, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow's story is about a man who got fired from the company he helped build, then returned 6 months later, owning the building itself.